Hi, my name is Edgars, and I've been debating and judging for about 10 years, and currently I'm coaching Team Latvia for the World Schools Debating Championship. Now, today, this workshop is going to be about rebuttal. So, I'm going to go over what I think rebuttal is, and then a couple of tricks, strategies, which I think could be potentially useful to you, regardless of your current level of debating. So that's to say, if you're a complete beginner, someone who's intermediate, or someone who's, quite good at debating. Hopefully there's going to be something for everyone. So let's dive in straight away. What is rebuttal? I think a simple definition is to say that rebuttal is you overcoming the strength of your opposition's arguments and responses as well. Because at the end of the day, the judge is going to, pick one of the two sides. And the judge hopefully is going to recognize the arguments from both sides and also the responses given from both sides. And you want the judge to sway towards your favor. So you have to give good responses to the opposition's arguments. Now, I guess I could just end this whole workshop right now because I think that's pretty much the definition of rebuttal. And I don't think there's a unique way of doing rebuttal. It's just basically thinking of a sophisticated, good answer to what the other side is saying. But I think I could at least share with you with some tricks that I, picked on the way in my years of debating and coaching. So in this workshop, I'm going to give you 7 tricks, tips or strategies or methods of debating, however you call them. There's going to be 7 of them. But before I start, I just want to answer one question, which I think some of you might have right now. How do I get better at rebuttal? I think the best advice I could give you, and if you just remember this thing, not the 7 I'm about to talk, but just this one thing, I think you're already golden. So this one tip of I think how to get better at rebuttal is basically just listening more to what the other side says. Because I think we get to this temptation whenever we're about to give a speech. So we're listening to our speaker just before us, and we're listening to their speech, to their arguments, to their refutation, etc. We have this temptation to just write stuff down instantly. Because you're about to speak, you have to think, how am I going to structure my speech? Maybe my argument is not that complete right now, so I need to think about it as well. So we just innately get the pen in your hand and just write stuff down. So I think it's best just sometimes just go back a bit and just think a bit more and write less. How to specifically do that? So I'm going to cover that into the my tips. So, I'm going to give 7 of them. Let's start with number 1, which I think is the one which every single debater uses, and especially beginners. The first one is about giving counterexamples or exceptions to arguments that were brought by the other side. Let's take a simple example. Suppose we have a motion which is something about whether we should have only state-run healthcare, like healthcare, no private healthcare, just state-run healthcare. And suppose the side which is in favor of state healthcare says that, Sweden does it and it's the best healthcare in the world. Now, suppose that the other side says, well, actually, Norway's healthcare is better in lots of metrics, and it doesn't always use state healthcare. So your example was wrong. Now, that could potentially be useful, but if you just stop at this very moment, probably you might get into some trouble. Because if your refutation is just about answering to 1 or 2 specific examples, not the crux of the argument, not the underlying logic, not all the premises, not the reasoning, then in the end, at best, you just corrected them and perhaps gave them an even a better example. So don't just concentrate on the examples given by the other side, or don't just think of exceptions to their logic. For example, let's say the motion was that we should have stricter gun control, and suppose the side in favor of the stricter gun control said that if you look at European countries, they don't have that many guns, and gun violence is at a very, very low point in comparison to countries where there's lots of guns. And then the other side comes up and says, well, I mean, look at Switzerland. It has lots of guns. It has one of the, if not the highest, gun per person gun usage per capita in the country. So that's to say most amounts of guns per person. So clearly that's not the case. Now, they might be correct. Switzerland does have a lot of guns, and their gun violence is actually quite low. But the point I'm trying to make here is that if you just kind of try undermine just the example given by the other side and not the underlying logic, then at best you're just going to correct them. Okay? So the takeaway of this first step, which you can still do this, but it's not the best one, is to, if you are doing this, if you are just correcting them or giving a counterexample to the example they gave, that could be potentially said to be the bare minimum of rebuttal. There's lots of more potentially otherwise good stuff you can otherwise do, because debating is not just about this ping pong of examples where the side with the most amount of examples wins. That's not how debating works. Otherwise, it would be just some sort of, the person who's memorized the most facts in the world fact book would just win, and that's not the case. So be very careful to see if the vast majority of your refutation does not concentrate just on nitpicking on specific examples and just trying to correct them, as opposed to trying to undermine the logic behind their arguments. So that was method number one. The reason why I told you this is because I think that's the most common thing I see, especially for people who are quite new in debating, right? Because that's one of the most easiest things you can do in refutation. But I think there's lots of more interesting stuff you can do. So that was number one. Let us go now to number two. And I call it mitigation. What mitigation basically means, and it's kind of like a debate term, is you make the severity or the strength of their particular argument like less severe, less impactful, less strong. And so you kind of soften their case. If they made a particularly hard line case, a particularly, say, oh, everything is going to go bad, etc. So let's just take an example. Suppose that the motion is that we should not give welfare to compulsive gamblers, people who just do lots of gambling, that we should not give them welfare. Suppose that proposition says that this is going to be a good mechanism by which these people are going to think more about their finances, so perhaps they're not going to be spending all that money to fuel their addiction, etc. Now, what a theme in terms of mitigation could do, opposition, they could come up and say, well, first of all, not all compulsive gamblers, gamble all of their welfare. That's not true for the vast majority of cases. Could be some portion of their welfare or their income, but not every single penny. Secondly, we can invest heavily into education, showing and teaching these people how to be more adequate and more careful about their personal finances. Thirdly, we can offer state-sponsored counseling to these people to specifically make budgets on their behalf. Fourthly, we can also limit or regulate these gambling institutions, these casinos, whatever, so that they do not prey on people who are the most vulnerable. Now, what this response basically does, right, I think you could see it just gave a bucket list of things how you kind of make the other side less severe. It basically says, oh, the stuff that you did, we can also kind of do. Or the stuff that you said was quite harsh, we can make less harsh. I think this mitigation is probably sometimes a good start, because it kind of puts the burden on the other side to respond, to, prop themselves up. Otherwise, if your mitigation is really good, then you could just walk away from this debate, because the other side really didn't show many reasons why this is really bad, as opposed to sometimes bad, but really it could be dealt by the other side. Just to make this clear, let's take another example of, let's say, a good mitigation. Suppose the motion is that that universities should be free to everyone. Okay, no one should pay anything. It's all covered by the state, by taxation money, and the side who's in favor of that has an argument how this will help people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds to go to university, because otherwise they might not be able to afford it. What I think a smart opposition, and by opposition I mean the side who says, we should not make all university free, or university should not be free, what I think a smart opposition could do in terms of mitigation is say, firstly, we can make a need-basis scholarships, which is already the case. Many universities that make people pay for their tuition also cover and give scholarships for people from the lowest socioeconomic backgrounds. Secondly, we can cap the amount of tuition fees so that they just do not blow up and get too extreme, too big in their total sum of money. Thirdly, we could give some sort of debt forgiveness program for people in very dire circumstances. Fourthly, we're also perfectly okay with having enforced system of quotas to universities so that they admit more people from more disadvantaged backgrounds. And they say, we can also help the most poorest of people, but we still think the university should not be free, because then we get more, competition, blah, blah, blah. They would make their arguments. So what this mitigation did, it kind of takes away chunks from the other side, right? It kind of takes away the win that the other side could bring. So if proposition says we are the team that, is going to give more people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds more possibilities, more opportunities, you can say, well, actually, no, we can mitigate this. We can have lots of other alternatives. So the conclusion of this second strategy about mitigation is that if you can reasonably, without sounding too much like the other side, show that there are some things you can do to lessen the severity of the harms they're giving, that could potentially be a good strategy in terms of rebuttal. Note that it doesn't destroy or undermine the basic premise of their side, the basic idea. It just says it's not that bad at the end of the day. There's trade-off of other things happening here. So I think mitigation is a good strategy you can use if you think that your other side is going really hard on some issues and sometimes even emotionally charged. You can just bring up mitigation and say, look, not everything is so black and white. We can also do the stuff that you're doing, but still opposing or proposing the motion. Okay? So that was point 2 about mitigation. Let's go to third strategy, which is ranking. By ranking, I mean that this is quite a common issue, also for experienced debaters, is that sometimes, you will not be able to respond to every single point that the other side is going to make. If you do that, if your whole debate case is just based on giving response to the other side, you're probably gonna really, really suffer in your own team's argumentation. And that's a high risk to make, because it's unlikely you're going to completely annihilate the other side. So at the end of the day, they will still have some points left, Whereas if your whole case was just giving responses, you will not have your own stuff standing at the end of the day. You will not have your own arguments. So the judge might just easily sway to the other side because, they might have this much, but at least it's, something as opposed to nothing. So what ranking helps is it helps you understand that you will need to drop some stuff. You will not be able to respond to everything that the other side says. So we need to be smart about the limited amount of time we have. We need to spend the most time answering to the most important of their arguments, right? As opposed to spending the same amount of time of their least important arguments, least strong arguments. Because if you destroy or annihilate their least strong arguments, good job. But their strongest arguments are probably going to still remain at the end of this debate, and that's probably not a good thing if you want to win that debate, right? And also it's just more fun engaging at the most strongest stuff. So how to do ranking? I think this comes with time. And this is something you're probably, if you're not that good at it now, most of us aren't, but I think the only way of you getting a feel for what could potentially be more relevant or important in debate is just to, again, pay more attention and write down less, think more. So let's just do a quick example, a really simple example, I think. Suppose the motion is that we should ban all cars in cities. So no more cars in cities. And suppose the proposition gives two arguments why we should ban cars. The first argument they give is that by having no cars in the cities and having just public transport or whatever, there is going to be fewer instances of traffic jams, which means that people are going to spend less time commuting, which means they're going to increase their productivity in their work. They're going to be working more hours. They're going to be less angry, less dissatisfied, or grudged about the fact they have to sit through 1 hour in the traffic. So the economy is going to get a boost. So that was the first argument. Suppose the second argument they make is our over-reliance on fossil fuels and the resultant pollution from these car emissions can potentially, in specifically really densely populated areas, create lots of health problems, such as if you as a child, you grow up in a city where there's lots of car fumes in your surrounding area, you might be more prone to getting asthma, which decreases the quality of your life. There are also some other proven instances, where air quality directly relates to worse health in the long term. Also, in terms of public safety, there's going to be fewer, maybe none, car accidents, which still happen in the city. So that means that fewer people are going to be severely injured or even die. So as a public health concern, banning cars is a really good idea. So which of these would you most likely respond to? Because note that the sequence was, I personally think, that the first argument, the way it was presented, probably is not going to be that relevant in the long term in the debate, because all it says is you're going to be a bit more productive, the economy is going to be a bit more higher, right? And people are going to feel less angry, But the second argument was about people suffer, their health suffers. Some people die in car accidents. I hope that you get the second one probably is more important. But because the argument about the traffic jams and the economy came first, if you just follow your instincts and you automatically write down the very first thing you hear, your very first response in your rebuttal is going to be about this point. And I I suppose it would be quite fun to respond to this argument because some parts of it were a bit silly, but that's probably not going to help you as much. A smarter way to go about this would to do the ranking system, right? To say that, okay, I have listened to their speech. Seems to me that their second argument probably is a bit better or has the potential of being better in the future. So I'm going to start with that one, and I'm going to spend more time responding to that argument as opposed to the first one, which perhaps is a bit too silly and quite easy to respond to, right? So again, I'm sorry. The only way that you're going to be able to learn ranking to a good level is when you just pay more attention to it. It's going to come with time. But the way you pay more attention to it is think about it, right? And again, I go back to the same thing I've been telling you all this time. It is good in Rebuttal to not always write everything instantly down, but just take a step back and just think about it. Just think a little bit. Are you going to change your sequence, or are you going to perhaps just scrap something entirely, or are you going to focus more attention on something else? Again, if you do the ranking system, trust me, it will do miracles for you, especially if beforehand you were quite a bit lacking in points in terms of, I don't know, strategy, where the judge might have said that although your responses were good, we did not feel that they were we felt that there were other responses where you could have spent more time, where you could have recognized a strategic need for you to respond to them, because in the end of this debate, those arguments were the one which brought the win to the other side. So that was number three about ranking. Let's go to number 4, which is a bit harder, but again, if you start thinking about them, right, about these a bit harder methods, it's going to be easier in the long term. So number 4 is something I like to call symmetric things, or symmetry. This is also kind of like a debate term, and if you ever done British parliamentary, you know, the university debate format, it's probably something that you have heard at some time. Symmetric things, or symmetry, what that basically means is the same thing is true or exists on both sides. So the same is true in proposition and in opposition. Let's take an example. Suppose that the motion is that we should ban all payday loans. We should ban all payday loans. And suppose that the side which is in favor of that has an argument where they say, look, there are some people who are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, or perhaps desperate under some unfortunate circumstances, where they need to have money right now for whatever reason that might be. Hence, they borrow from these payday loan companies. The interest rates that these payday loan companies give are quite high. So in the end, the amount of money they have to pay back is a lot, and they suffer from that in their long-term financial planning. They might go bankrupt or sell their stuff, whatever. It's bad. It's horrible. People are suffering. So suppose you're the other side. So suppose you're opposition now. And a refutation of symmetry would go something along the lines of everything that the other side said about people being from low socioeconomic backgrounds, or people having unfortunate circumstances, is true regardless whether you ban payday loans or not. Even if you ban payday loans, people will still have some unfortunate occurrences. There are still going to be poor people who will need money. So they will still borrow that money, but not from payday loan companies anymore because they're bad. They're gonna, perhaps, not all, but some, will go to some more dodgy options, such as loan sharks, or getting money from organized crime if they're not able to get that from their relatives or whatever. Which is a lot worse because it's less regulated and it's organized crime, yada yada yada. So the point here is that note that the mechanism, and by mechanism basically mean a sequence of things that we describe. So we describe what some people are, what do they want, what do they do, right? That same mechanism is also true on opposition side, whether you ban payday loans or not. So you don't really need to refute this mechanism. You don't need to say, well, actually, even though some people might come to unfortunate circumstances and they do take the loan, well, sometimes they might be too afraid to take a loan, or sometimes they just figure something out, or we have the welfare system or something else, right? You don't need to go into that. You can just straight in say, yes, this is true, and it's symmetric. It's the same on both sides. The question in this debate is, which is worse? What's happening now, what they describe, or the exact same thing, but under different circumstances. So let's say under the guise of organized crime. Which is worse? We think ours is worse, so this is our refutation. The same stuff happens on both sides, but on our side, if you ban payday loans, it's going to be far worse. So we win. Just to be clear, let's just quickly take another example. This is a classic one. Suppose the motion is that we should just ban all payday. That we should that we should legalize the sale of organs. Right, that we should allow people to just sell their organs and for other people to buy them. That there should be a legal opportunity, an open market to do this. Now, same structure, same logic. The side which says that we should not do this, that we should not legalize the sale of and purchase of organs, says, well, there are some people who really need money for, a multitude of reasons. They're going to sell their organs. They will get that money, but also their health is going to suffer because, you might live with just one kidney. That's true, but your life is probably not going to be that good with living with one kidney, especially if you're from lower socioeconomic background. I hope that you already have guessed that the response here, response of symmetry, could be to say, yes, there will be people who will be dying circumstance, who will be in need of instant financial reward, and guess what? They will still sell their organs if it's possible for them. And they will do this in a thing called a black market, which is far worse because it's not regulated at all. Sometimes even people die during the operations, as opposed to a regulated free market where the state says if you want to be a hospital where people can, where you extract organs and stuff, that you need to have certain rules, etc., etc. So again, the same thing. What they describe, people's behavior or the so-called mechanism, is true on both sides, is symmetric. The question is, which is worse or better, right? I could go through some other examples, but I think these are quite vivid in terms of their explanation. But again, the basic idea behind this method is that you do not need to refute or disprove every single thing that the other side says. Sometimes it's good to just take a step back and realize that what they're saying actually is kind of, if not mostly, true for also your side. And then recognize that you can exploit this particular relevation, all right? Is to recognize that there are just some things that happen on both sides, regardless of what the motion does. And if you realize that, you can say, well, our thing is much worse. Or at minimum, even if both of the things are kind of like same, you can say, well, since this thing happens regardless whether you do this motion or not, there's really no point in doing it, right? Because if they want to stop a bad thing, and by doing this motion, that bad thing still persists, there's really no point in doing this. Because why would you do something that simply does not work? And that would be good enough for opposition to win. That's like the bare minimum you can get from the symmetry argument, to say that refutation argument, the symmetry refutation, you call it argument refutation, doesn't matter, that the same thing happens, there's no point. Okay, so that was point 4. Let's go to point 5. And this is a bit cheeky. It's really has nothing to really do with, I think, logic, but it's something that just works. And I call it the effect of multiples. And by that, I mean, instead of giving a refutation in this stream of thought where you just your language is flowing, your ideas are flowing, you can divide it up. You can say, they claimed that this will happen. We have 3 reasons why that's not the case. Or we have 3 points of refutation. And all you do, instead of having this flow of ideas and thought, right, you just neatly package them in 3 at least somewhat separate things or ideas, right? And then just go over them, saying number 1, number 2, number 3. Why is this, I think, a good thing you can do? Well, 2 reasons. First one, whatever you say you have 2 or 3 or so reasons, and you do enumeration, you just sound more sophisticated than you actually are. Sounds like you have a plan, sounds like you have thought about this, or sounds like you have, lots of things to say. Because whenever you hear that someone has, 4 or so points of refutation, you think, that's a lot of point of refutation. They probably onto something. The second reason why this is a good method is because it just allows you to structure your thoughts more easily. Because I think one of the beauties in debating that really, the debating really teaches you, is to realize that many things that we talk about can be categorized in specific, instances or types or whatever. And the good thing about this is the systematic kind of thinking not only increases, I think, the speed of you thinking, also it makes you write less. Because think about it, if you are giving a refutation and on your piece of paper or on your piece of paper you're just writing a paragraph or some single sentences, right? Takes a bit of time, and sometimes if you have been given a POI, a point of information, in the middle of your speech, you might forget specifically where you're at. However, if you know that you have just 3 things, and you can usually just write words, just like 1, cost, 2, black market, whatever, and 3, something else, you know where you are in your speech. You are currently at your second point of your 3 points of refutation. If you want, you can drop the third one if you really see that you're running low on time, and you just are more structured in terms of thinking. It just really helps you having this sort of plan, because right now I know, unless I screwed up, that I'm at my 5th point of tip in Rebuttal out of 7. So I currently know where I am, although I'm just barely looking at my notes and I really didn't do any enumeration. So the effect of multiples is just a gimmick that you can use, but also I think it helps you to just think in a more structured manner about how to give responses. So that was number 5. Let's go to number 6. And this is going to be perhaps a bit odd that you think I talk about this, but I want to talk about speaker roles. By that I mean what the first, seconds, and so forth speakers do in the World Schools format. Now, I will not talk about the third speaker, because I think it's pretty much clear that speaker, their job is to do refutation quite a lot. I want to talk more about the second and especially the first speaker, where I think many people don't talk about their contribution of refutation as much. So I want to start with the second speaker. This is something from my experience as a judge I have seen a lot. Suppose you're the second proposition speaker. You have just heard your opposition's first speaker give their speech. What usually happens within beginners or even intermediate debaters is that when they give refutation, what they give is their refutation of the other side's arguments, their constructive arguments, their own stuff. And what is kind of left behind, and what is kind of left for the third speaker to do is responding to responses. So by that I mean, if you're the second proposition speaker, it would make sense for you also to give a response to the response the first opposition speaker gave to your first speaker, because they were attacking your case, right? They were having a go at it. They were giving their refutation. So if you just leave it hanging, what happens then? If that reputation has been somewhat good, at least, that might sway the decision the judge will make in the end. And also, your third speaker cannot reasonably remember every single thing or discuss reasonably every single thing that happened within the debate. So it is smart for you to also give the so-called rebuttal of rebuttal, or you give your rebuttal to their rebuttal, which could also be just simply said as you defend your previous speaker by giving a response to their responses. In effect, I think there's one formula I think second speakers should do, and I just always teach, even to my team when I'm coaching my team Latvia for World Schools. Second speaker has to do 3 things. So 1, obviously you have to give your own arguments, the split material, 1 or 2 arguments. Number 2, obviously you have to respond to the other side's constructive arguments, right? Number 3, you have to defend your previous speaker. You have to give the responses to their responses, just to keep everything tidy. Because in reality, in debating, we say there's a distinction between what's an argument and what's refutation or rebuttal. That distinction is arbitrary, right? Refutation could even be called an argument. Refutation could be made in the form of argument, and arguments could be made in the form of refutation. It's just wordplay we use just to have a clear understanding, to talk about things. Because it'd be just quite tedious to say, if we never use the word rebuttal, we just say, this counter argument of their argument or whatever, So it is good for the second speaker to keep this in mind. If you're a second speaker, think about the responses you need to give to their responses. And also, if you're the second opposition speaker, realize that you'll have to give second proposition speaker's responses to your first opposition speaker's responses. I really hope this makes sense, because hopefully it hasn't been that convoluted. So that was about the second speaker. Let's talk about the first speaker. I will start with the first speaker from opposition. you know, usually quite simple. Usually what the vast majority of first opposition speakers do, they give an introduction, give their opposition stance or model, whatever, do the flagging, in our speech, I'm going to talk about these two arguments. My second speaker is going to talk about our third argument, whatever. And then they say, okay, now I'm going to do rebuttal. And then they do their rebuttal, and then they go to their own arguments. This structure is good. The only comment I want to make about the first opposition speaker is there is a trap that many first opposition speakers fall into when it comes to refutation. They spend far too much time doing refutation. By that I mean, if we're talking about an 8-minute speech, which is this, the usual standard for a World Schools format, I always say to my team, never spend more than just 2 minutes. Do not go to 3. God, no, do not do 4. And if you do more than 5, I will get a bit angry. The reason for that is you, as the first opposition speaker, you have a special duty to bring out the crux of your opposition's case, your main arguments. Because remember, you cannot just win with giving responses. You also have to give your own arguments. So if you have a particularly good first proposition speaker you're against, and they make lots of good points with lots of good sub-points, do not feel bad that you will not be able to respond to all of them. Like, that's okay. The third speaker, the second speaker, they should be focused more on refutation. That is their job. You will not be able to respond to every single thing your opposing first speaker said, assuming they were quite good in their speech. So just concentrate on the most important stuff. Do not spend more than 2 minutes so that your arguments can be fleshed out, so you have time to give the grounding for your opposition team. So at the end of the day, it's not just about you being a reactionary opposition. By reactionary opposition, I mean an opposition just goes on about rebuttal, but doesn't really bring their own arguments. So now to the first proposition speaker. You might think, well, why is he talking about the first proposition speaker? Because there is nothing to refute. There is no rebuttal because you're the first speaker, to give your speech. I respectfully disagree. One of the best tips I've received as a first speaker, and also when I was doing the British parliamentary format, when I was the Prime Minister, the very first person to give their speech, was that one of the best first speeches you can give is just rebuttal. And I know this might sound a bit counterintuitive, especially because I've just been telling you that your whole speech should not be rebuttal if you're first opposition speaker. But by rebuttal here, I mean something a bit different. I mean that there's this thing called a preemptive rebuttal or preemptive refutation. By preemptive, I mean it's before something has happened. So before the opposition team gives foundation to their arguments, you already have a response you give. What this basically means is you recognize that debating is not just about we, the proposition, have our arguments, they, the opposition, have their arguments. We're going to exchange with some responses and may the best win. Yeah. Sometimes, actually a lot of cases, if the motion is good and if the motion has any clash, is that there's quite a significant overlap between what the proposition can say and what the opposition can say, right? Again, remember the symmetry thing. Many things can happen at the same time. lots of human behavior or to describe mechanisms in debates happen on both sides. The question is which side, whether it's proposition or opposition, can bring the debate more on them. So when I say that the first proposition speaker can give rebuttal, by that I mean they can preemptively anticipate the responses that could be given by the other side. So that would make your argument stronger. If you say, oh, in case opposition says this, we already have this covered. One simple trick is to say, whenever you're describing people and say, people are going to do this and this and this. So for example, let's just turn back to the Gamber's motion, where the motion was that we should cut all welfare to compulsive gamblers. And let's suppose you're the first proposition speaker. A really, really simple thing you can do is say, look, these people spend their welfare on fueling their addiction in gambling. Not all people, and they don't spend the entirety of their welfare, but it is a significant part of these people, even if it's a minority people, and even if it's not that much of their welfare. These people are especially vulnerable and we should protect them. And even if it doesn't happen throughout the entirety of people who do compulsive gambling, still there is some part who fall under this definition, and we are talking about them specifically, and we want to protect them. What this avoids is just opposition coming up and doing the whole mitigation thing. Remember, it's not all people, it's not just the welfare thing. Another thing you can say is the first speaker can say, look, opposition might come up and say they're going to invest in education, financial literacy. Cool, but it might work in some cases, but probably not in every single case. We know that whatever education program the government has, it doesn't work perfectly. Some people don't have the necessary time, attention, or even awareness that the program exists, right, to actually go over that. So if they say that they have all of these other alternatives to fix this, well, it might work some of the time, but really not in the vast majority of cases we're talking about, right? You see what I kind of did? I, as the first speaker, the first proposition speaker, basically kind of predicted the future, right? Which looks cool. It looks cool from the perspective of the judge, and it just makes your own argument stronger, because what this preemptive rebuttal thing is essentially just fixing the holes in your argument and making them that much more durable. You increase the thickness of your shield, which protects your argument, which protects your case, if you do that. Now, please do not overdo this. Your whole first proposition speech should not be about, in case they say this, we're going to say this. In case they say this. It should not be an exhaustive list of you trying to play bingo and predicting the future. It's just a neat trick you can sometimes use in specific cases where you feel it's appropriate, just to prop up your argument, do preemptive rebuttal. So the summary of this point 6 was that the second speaker should think about also giving responses to the responses received, given to your side, so defending your case against opposition responses. The first opposition speaker should be quite careful with allocating time in their refutation. And the first proposition speaker can also sometimes do rebuttal. Well, you can call it a rebuttal, but okay, preemptive rebuttal, doesn't matter. So let's go to part 7, the last one. And this is my favorite one. And I call it rebuttal from importance. Rebuttal from importance. Briefly, what do I mean by this? So, I think every single argument within debating needs to answer 2 key questions. that a good judge will ask themselves. The first question is this true, or is this most likely to be true? And the second one, which usually is a bit forgotten, should I care? So I think arguments not only need to focus on explaining why they are most likely to be true, why do they describe reality somewhat accurately, but also at the end of this why we should particularly care. Because look, there are lots of things that are true, but don't necessarily make us care, right? We don't might necessarily care about them. And what the vast majority, I think, of beginner and intermediate teams do, they focus their attack, their refutation, on the first part, on the, is this more likely to be true? Is this a true statement? Does this reflect reality? And kind of not, almost always entirely missing the possibilities that the other side gives, the possibilities of also attacking the side which asks the question, should I care? Let's just go quickly, let's say 2 examples. First example, let's suppose that the motion is about introducing mandatory quotas for university admissions or workspaces. So you say there are certain types of people that should always have a pre-allocated place in the workplace. That's what a quota is. So let's say you have an opposition team, they're against the quotas, and they say, well, because there is a limited number of places in universities and workforce, because you are already allocating a certain number of places to some people, this will push other people out, and those people are going to be actually under a meritocratic system qualified, right? You are pushing out people who are qualified in favor of people who you just think deserve this, right? This is unfair to people who have worked hard, invested in themselves, and who would actually probably do the job better because, if there were no quotas, they would get that job or university place, because, they would perform better at tests or interviews. So it's unfair to them, and also it lessens the intellectual work someone could do for university or the potential gain it could someone give to their employer. Now, you could say in response that, that's not always the case, actually, because of institutional biases. There are some people who are equally qualified to get that position, but they don't, because of these biases. So this is just correcting mechanism. So this is kind of saying, you say this is true, I say this is true, and then, let's see what happens. Let the judge decide. There's a trick you can use, however, there's something else you can do. You can say, okay, sure. What you're saying is probably true. There will be some people who are, let's say, more qualified, and they will be pushed out. However, we say those places will be taken up by people from disadvantaged backgrounds, people who have had a much harder life, and we say that the impact on their life, getting a university degree, getting a higher paid getting a job with a higher paid salary, is going to impact their life so much more because they come from a lower point in terms of, socioeconomic level, whatever. So your side is going to suffer by about this much, but our side, the people we get in, are going to, benefit by about this much. We care about these people more because the impact they will get, the benefit they will get, is much greater for them, right? And their lives will be made much easier as opposed to the inconvenience of someone who's, let's say, richer and had previously better education. So what essentially you're saying is that you recognize that both of these ideas brought are true, but you just say to the judge, please care about our idea more as opposed to theirs. Theirs is also probably true, but ours is more important. Ours is something you should care more about. And this is a persuasive way how to just like sometimes even confuse the other side, because they've been used to just, you responding to their substantive arguments. Now you're just saying, yeah, sure, we agree. However, we just think you should not care as much. So quickly, let's just go also another example, just to be, let's say, more clear perhaps. Suppose that the motion is whether we should, assuming it's feasible, whether we should just ban all anonymity on the internet. So by that I mean, whenever you want to comment somewhere, leave a comment or do something, you need to have a government license ID, and you need to log in, and whenever you go on the wide web, whatever you do, there's going to be a picture of your face and your name, so everyone knows you said that, as opposed to, I don't know, Tinkleberry 669 or something like that, right? So let's suppose the side who's against that says, well, this will decrease the likelihood of people being honest and expressing their true thought, that hijack some people's creativity, their ability to just went and just talk about things they would like to talk about because they would be afraid of the judgment they might perceive. And let's say you made an argument about the fact that one pernicious thing that anonymity does is it makes people less accountable for the stuff they do, and some of the stuff is quite nasty. So let's say bullying, which we can prove that bullying in the internet through anonymous accounts has actually caused to some suicides and lots of mental health problems. So here, you could, I guess, go on about and saying, well, actually people will be more honest because now everyone's gonna, know that, well, there's no reason for me to judge anyone because all of us are here naked on the internet. Everyone knows who everyone is, etc., etc. You could again say, they said this, we say the opposite is gonna happen. Or you can just acknowledge and say, yes, they might get some more honesty, some real talk in the internet, but we get fewer instances of teenage suicide, which we think is far more important. The value of life is infinite, right? The value of someone having an honest talk and, let's say, feeling a bit better about themselves might still have some value, but probably it's not going to be as big as people having massive mental health issues arising from specifically people, bullying others through the fact that they can do so anonymously and get no punishment or no social stigma because no one knows if they actually did it. So again, the idea here is that you recognize that what the other side said is like both of your things that you're saying, whether your proposition or opposition, are probably true, but you look at it from a different perspective. You don't just focus on the thing, well, are there exceptions here? Can I do mitigation? Can I do something else? You say, okay, let's just say it's true, but on the scales of importance, our stuff wins, right? So on that metric, we win, and a good judge would recognize you as winning that clash. I don't want you to overdo this, right? Because hopefully it's you might not get the impression that this is some sort of hack, right, of debating where you no longer need to scrutinize the veracity, where you no longer need to look if what your other side said is true or not. You just need to say, well, this is more important, even if every single thing they said is true. We just think ours is more important. That might get you in some trouble, because this trick, although I think is a good one, will not work in every single instance. And sometimes agreeing to everything that the other side says is probably not a good idea, and I will let you figure out yourself why that's the case. So that was point 7. So that was trick or strategy point 7. overall, I hope this workshop has given you a perhaps a new perspective or ideas how to do refutation. Again, there's really not one set thing, a set formula how to do refutation, right? It's not set in stone. There's lots of different methods how you can go about this and do this. But, just experiment, try stuff out, because debating is supposed to be fun. And refutation, I think, rebuttal is one of the most fun things in debating because that's the most engaging one. So, even if you might be initially, scared or might not necessarily believe that one of the potential, tricks I've given you are good, just maybe try them out just once, see what happens. So, just on time. Okay, so I hope this has been useful. Rebuttal is a very, very broad topic. This is just tip of it. This is just one part of it, but I do hope there's some value in this. And to those who have stayed here up until now, 1 hour it seems, admirable. Thank you, and see you in the Swedish Nationals.